Hey there, welcome to the VA Design System orientation. My name is Jamie Gibbs, and I'm an engineer on the VA Design System team. So let's get started. So the agenda for this orientation is that I'm going to talk about what is the VA Design System. There are a number of elements and packages and areas that the design system manages. So I'm going to step through each of those things, including the design patterns and guidelines, the Figma libraries, the CSS library package, and the component library. I'll also talk about how you can contribute to the design system and also a few other resources that might be helpful. Okay, so what is the VA design system? The design system is made up of a number of different packages and documentation. And the main areas are the design patterns and guidelines. The design system also manages a number of Figma libraries. On the technical side, there's a component library package that's going to include web components and a few other things in our monorepo, as well as the CSS library package. And we'll dive into all of these things a little bit more later. There's this circle on the side called VA Design System Resources. This is a new package that will be coming soon to the design system. And essentially, it's just going to be a separate package dedicated to resources in the design system that you can use. At the moment, that's going to include things like tokens and assets like fonts. So a little bit of design system history. The VA design system was started around 2017, and it was initially named Jean Pants. Now, Jean Pants was essentially just a collection of shared components and global style sheets on what was then called VA.gov. Over the next couple of years, the design system evolved and launched design.va.gov. And this is going to be the hub website for everything that you're looking for related to the design system. That was launched, and also a package called Formation was created. And this was essentially the full design system styling library as an NPM package. Formation at the time leveraged US Web Design System version 1. It also included Foundation for Sites, and for icons, it used Font Awesome. The design system was offering React components at this time, which is now VA.gov here. So moving ahead a little bit more, the design system shifted from offering React components, and they are starting to be converted to platform agnostic web components. So that was a fairly large effort. And by the time 22, 23 came around, the design system also started working on making an upgrade from that original USWDS v1, which had been deprecated at that point, to USWDS version 3. And a new styling package called CSS library is developed, and that would eventually replace Formation. So along the way here, web components were also being upgraded to use those USWDS v3 styles. And then by that next year, the design system was able to then fully deprecate Formation and the original React components on VA.gov. So by 2024, VA.gov is now running on USWDS version 3. It's also running on the component library web components, and also using the CSS library, all using USWDS version 3. So in 2025, the team continued to evolve. And at the time of this recording, the design system has now become a unified web and mobile team. So the VA design system supporting both VA.gov web, but also VA mobile app. So let's dive into more about what is the design system. And I'll start with the design patterns and guidelines. So as I previously mentioned, design.va.gov is the hub where you should visit to reference all of these things that we're going to go over. You'll find there the design patterns. So these are going to be the research best practice patterns for solving user-focused tasks and recurring user interface assigned problems. And you'll find this just on the header navigation. There'll be links to all of these things, including the patterns. You'll find the content guidelines here. So this is the style guide for VA.gov, and that's going to be helpful content for veterans and non-veterans. There's also going to be component guidance. This is guidance for those UI elements so that we can create a consistent, accessible experience for veterans and non-veterans. There will also be a section for accessibility considerations. And so these are going to be the standards we use related to accessibility when using or even contributing back to the VA design system. Now, each component and pattern in the design system is going to be assigned a maturity value. This will be outlined on design.va.gov, and I'll have all of these links in the description of the video to reference if you'd like to. But essentially, these maturity scale assignments are just going to help the designers and developers know that they can use the pattern, they can use the component, and what level of caution to take when doing that. So there'll be 3 levels here: use with caution, and don't use. Okay, so the Figma libraries, the design system does build and maintain several different Figma libraries. There is the component library, so that's going to be core design system components. You'll have styles and tokens, and that automatically gets added to new Figma files as you're building those out. There are also going to be component examples. That's going to demonstrate the component with its properties and different variations. And it's also going to provide some common examples that can be copied into your, if you're a designer, into your own Figma designs. We also have a few more helpful libraries here in Figma. One is the templates, patterns, and forms, and that's going to be templates for all the patterns that you'll see on design.va.gov, including form patterns, and the web annotation kit. So that's going to be tools to document your designs with accessibility, development, component identification, and other notes. Okay, so I'm going to shift now into some more of the technical side of the design system, and I'm going to start with the CSS library. Overview of the CSS library. So this is a standalone package. It is published on NPM, and it's going to provide styles, some global styles, tokens, and utilities that support the web. The design tokens, so these are variables that are for spacing, color, typography, and the CSS library offers them at the moment in different formats. So the tokens can be used as custom properties. They can be imported as an SCSS file, so you can use SAS variables. And there's also a JSON format, which has been useful in other projects to be able to use as needed. So projects can consume them. We have this as a native CSS variable, or you can consume them with a preprocessor. I have added a note here related to tokens because the plan is that they will be moved in the near future to the VA design system resources package that is currently being developed right now. The CSS library also offers utility classes. So these are single purpose classes that will help with styling, markup. It will help with creating layouts on pages. And these should be really quick, easy ways to sort of get your pages updated stylistically with margins, paddings, and display. There's also some core styles and modules. A lot of this is base CSS that is specific to VA.gov, although the CSS library includes that for any site that wants to use it. So let me talk a little bit more about how to use tokens. Like I mentioned before, they're available in different formats. And one of those formats is custom properties. This is probably, if you're developing on the web, the easiest way to get moving with tokens from the CSS library. They are used with native var function, so you don't have to deal with any extra pre-processing. And if you are developing on VA.gov, the custom properties, they're already available globally, so you don't have to import anything extra to even use them. In this example, you'll see that I'm using a custom property that's a token VAD's color success dark, and it just passes right into that var function in your CSS directly into a style sheet. Another format that's fairly popular is the SCSS variables. And if you prefer to use Sass, that's absolutely fine. The caveat there is that you would need to make a separate import and able to use them. And so here's an example of that import. It's coming directly from the CSS library tokens. And I'm using the Sass variable similarly to the custom property, except you don't need to pass it in as a var. Throw a $ in front of it, and it should display that token. Again, a caveat. So the tokens, they will be moving to that new VA Design System resources package in the near future. This should ideally still all work the same. The difference is that you would likely need to change the import path for Sass variables. Another very useful thing that the CSS library offers developers are utilities. These are utility styling classes that should provide some flexibility when you're styling your pages and elements. It makes it so that you don't need to add anything extra to your style sheet. You just throw in the CSS class into your element and you should be good to go. You can review these utilities on design.va.gov. If you navigate to Foundation Utilities, they should all be listed there with examples as well. And you'll see all sorts of different utilities like background color and font family and line height. A quick example of how that works. The utility is applied just like a normal CSS class. I do call out that if you're using just regular HTML, that's going to be class. And if you're using JSX, that will be class name, camel case. The utility classes will be prefixed with vads-u. And in this example, I have some markup where there's a div that's wrapping a paragraph. The div is given a background color of blue as well as some padding. And the paragraph is, text is colored white. So in order to do that without writing any extra CSS, I can just use some utility classes with the vads-u background color primary, which makes the background blue, vads-u padding 1, which adds padding around all sides. And in the paragraph element, vads-u color white turns the text white. So a quick overview, the difference between tokens and utilities from the CSS library. The tokens hold a single reusable design value, like a hex color value or a line height value. And in the web, they are used directly in CSS style sheets. And that's going to assign a value to a specific CSS attribute in your style sheet. So I like to think of tokens as just sort of like the raw ingredients. So this would be like flour, sugar, salt in your kitchen. Utilities, on the other hand, these are going to be predefined CSS classes. And these are going to also provide a specific style, but they're also assigned to a specific CSS styling element. So these are used directly on an HTML element. They're not used in the style sheet. If you can think of a utility class as sort of like the prepared ingredients. So if you have pre-mixed dough or ready-to-use sauce, it's going to save you time actually getting your page styled and your elements styled and provide consistency throughout. So leaving the CSS library, let's now move on to the component library. The component library, it's essentially a monorepo, but it contains several packages that includes web components. It's primarily for VA.gov, but web components are framework agnostic, so they can be used anywhere that an HTML element can be used. VA.gov, CodePens, Angular applications, they can be used just about anywhere. We do have a tutorial for developers or folks that are familiar, maybe somewhat familiar with React, who want to learn more about how web components work. I'll link to that tutorial in the description of the video. And that might be a good way to get up to speed on web components if you're not quite fully familiar with them yet. As for the VA design system, though, the components are all prefixed with VA dash, and some of them have variations. So in this example, I'm showing that there is a VA button web component, and there's also a couple of different variations. There's VA button icon and VA button pair. To review the different web components, I would recommend just going to Storybook. This is a place where we document the component properties. We also document the events. We have some examples there. And there's also code snippets that you can copy and paste if you need to get you started quickly in your applications. Okay, so using web components, a web component, it looks like an HTML element, and it essentially is just an HTML element. And on the screen, I have an example of VA Alert. It does use unique styling, though, and it does have some unique functionality. It can work, as I mentioned before, in any JavaScript framework. It can also work on just standard HTML pages because it is just an HTML element. With that said, there's just a really high level anatomy of a web component. So as I mentioned here, we have VA Alert, which is a custom HTML element. The web component also has a shadow DOM. This is a separate DOM node tree that includes scoped CSS styles. And essentially what that means is just that any internal styles of the web component stay internal, any external styles stay external. And so there is this scoped nature of web components that keep it fairly contained as it's related to styling. And the web components also have properties and slots. Props are values that you pass into the web component. It's essentially like an HTML attribute. They also support attributes, as HTML elements do. And as VA Alert example, there are several properties on it, and also normal attribute of class. It includes things like full width, slim, status, visibility. These are properties that you can change on the web component in order for it to do different things. The other piece of a web component are slots, and a slot is where you can add HTML markup to be displayed by the web component. And in the VA alert example, the slot would be everything in between the opening and closing VA alert tag. In this case, it's a paragraph. I have just some lorem ipsum text in there, and the VA alert is going to display that as part of its hydrated component through the slot. There is a distinction of how to render the web component in the component from the component library, depending on if you are using the vanilla version or the React binding version. The vanilla version is just a standard web component. It is what you see regardless of how you're generating the component itself. And it looks just like a normal HTML element. This is in my example here is VA button. And you'll see that the vanilla version is really just the kebab case of the name. So it'll be VA-button, opening and closing tags. That can be used without any additional imports or processing on VA.gov. If you're already loading the component library and some other integration, you don't need to make any extra imports for that as well necessarily. As a convenience, though, to applications that are using React, like VA.gov, the web components can also be imported as a React component. And what that looks like is what they called camel case. So instead of VA dash button, it would look like capital VA, capital B, UTTON. That's what we consider the React binding of a web component. In both cases, they're still the web component. They just have a little bit of different functionality in React environments. So when to use React binding version then, as opposed to just the vanilla web component? In our developer docs, we go over this a little bit more in depth. At a high level though, generally if you are needing to do something like add a callback function to an event that the component is emitting, or if you need to pass in some sort of complicated data structure into a component's property, like an object or an array or something like that, we recommend using the React binding version as a convenience. Otherwise, you would need to use extra JavaScript in order for those types of things to work in the vanilla web component version. Okay, so I want to touch on a little bit the component library's Google Analytics situation. Many of the design system components do have Google Analytics already built in. They are just two separate variations of analytics in the components. So there's a group of components that are considered sensitive form components. And these are the components that could potentially handle sensitive information. These are like text input components or select components, that sort of thing. These will have analytics turned off by default. So if you would like to leverage the built-in component analytics, you would need to intentionally enable the component analytics with the enable analytics prop. The other group of components, these are non-sensitive components. These will have analytics turned on by default. So these are things like the VA link or VA telephone, I believe, which is just a static thing. There will, though, be a disable analytics prop, which you can set to false if you would like to sort of take over those analytics and do something custom. And that would avoid duplicate analytics being fired. Okay, so let's move on to contributing to the design system. The design system loves contributions. So here are a few things, a few ways to contribute back. We do have a page on design.va.gov that should outline all of these things in more depth, but just at a super high level, what the design system would love to hear from you about are new patterns or updates to patterns. We would love to hear about new components or new component variations. Content additions to design.va.gov would be super helpful. If there are any bug fixes you can provide, not only to components, but to the site itself, like Storybook or the documentation site here. If you see a grammar or a typo, that would be great to be able to get help fixing. And any feedback or suggestions on any of the things that I've talked about so far would be great too. And again, I'll leave a link to this in the description of the video to go ahead and take a look at when you have a chance. So to wrap things up, there are a couple other resources that I wanted to point out. I've already talked about the documentation site, which is design.va.gov. There's a link, I'll have a link to the component library on GitHub, and also a link to Storybook to make sure that you can view that. There will also be a place to submit an issue in GitHub for us, and that should include not only technical issues, but if there's issues with content or those sorts of things. And there's a dedicated Slack channel. This is a public Slack channel that anybody is welcome to come in and ask questions or start discussions. Okay, thanks everyone for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you out there. Bye.